right, good morning everyone. Happy Friday. I'm super excited to be up here today. Especially welcome to anyone in New York who might be guests. It's a great privilege and honor to be up here and talking to you all. For an introduction, as Sarah just said, thank you Sarah for the warm intro. I am Stephanie Grammel out of the Boston office. I've been at Nextrum since 2012 and I'm on our EPP team here at Nextrum. What that means, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is I am on the client-facing role. So I work with our HR and benefits teams to roll out our product and services to them. Before I dive into this topic of exploring the unknown, which is probably very relevant and applicable to a lot of you, I do want to thank Tom, Albert, James, and the First Friday team for this opportunity. Going through this exercise and thinking about it has become something, it's very evident that while I'm up here and I'm teaching you guys about it, it's still something I struggle with too. So going through this exercise has been super helpful, and I hope you guys find value in it as well. So that being said, quick agenda and quick recap of where things have been. In March, we heard from Greg on how to win the first impression. Next month, you'll hear from Tarun around the topic of negotiating with empathy. But for the purpose of today, what I'm going to dive into, some next jumper unknown situations, areas where you guys actually struggle as well in this area. Some common failures that I myself have made, and I've seen that other people, whether it be friends, family, colleagues, make as well. And then finally, some simple steps to get started. I want to keep this brief, I want to keep it light, and I want to make it easy takeaways for you guys to hopefully help you start attacking some of these situations and understand where to begin. So that being said, I reached out to a lot of you, so I really appreciate the people who responded, gave me some feedback, gave me some insights. And areas where they've struggled with, when they've been giving a project or they have a topic where they just don't know where to begin and where they've gotten stuck. Heard from a lot of you in different things like, how do I bring more companies into Academy? How do I build out a finance channel? How do you create a new culture tour? How to get partners more widely adopted? Bringing out FitNut, dominating finance and tech, get 100% engagement with top 10. It's all very real, and there are real challenges that we face as a company and as individuals. What I hope to accomplish out of this is building some practical tips, how you can get started. I'm not going to be here to solve these challenges for you, but rather give you a framework of how you can go about and feel comfortable attacking these situations going forward. So that being said, before I dive into some tactical tips, I really want to get our brains working. It's early still, it's a Friday morning. So we're going to do an interactive exercise to really wake up. So for non-Next Jumpers, anyone in the room, I encourage you to make this applicable to you by using your own company, by using your own experiences, but with this hypothetical exercise. So we're going to partner up with a person to your direct right, and I realize everyone has different rights, so just grab someone close to you to work on this. And answer this question. So we want to apply for some awards here at Next Jump about the great places to work. We haven't really historically done a lot of this, and you've been put in charge with the person to your right. Work with them, talk through the approach. We're going to take 2 or 3 minutes to really just brainstorm what you guys would do if you were given this project. So I encourage you to match up. I'll time it. I'll give you guys a heads up when it's time to stop, but just talk it through with someone to your right.
That's fine. Let's just that's fine. I didn't see that. I would say
I'm going to partner with you because I find myself in situations where I'm usually working alone, so I'm going to force myself to not work alone here. So my approach was to always figure out what is a great place to work. So if something happens, okay, so at least a good start. Then maybe get a sense of what a great place to work is for your and
I was convinced of that.
I'm not gonna do it slow.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're coming up on like the 3 minutes, so you guys can start wrapping up your conversations. That's much easier than when Greg tried to do it.
I think we shut off the sound.
They're still talking.
So moving on from that, so as we settle back down and get into this, a few thoughts going through your head as you did that exercise. Either that was terrible, why the heck did you make me do that? It was awkward to discuss, I felt all over the place. I didn't really know how to go about it. All very common challenges and things that go through our heads when we're in situations where it's very ambiguous. There's no clear path, there's no clear starting ground. So I want to show that you're actually not alone. We all face this, whether it's in a situation like this, whether it's in a business situation, whether it's in a personal situation. We all struggle with this. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through first 3 failures that I see people make a lot, myself included. It's not to say they're the only 3 failures out there. There's probably a lot of different areas that we all struggle with. But it's 3 big ones that I can share real personal life examples with you guys as well, and just how to attack it and how to be more proactive in those situations. So these 3 different common failures. The first one we often see, where you're paralyzed from the start. There's 2 different ways that this one is applicable. So the first one is you're either too theoretical. You have this big idea, this big plan, you're always talking it up, but you never actually move beyond that initial big plan or idea. The second one is one that I personally struggle with a lot, is where you become paralyzed by the fear of failure. If it's not easily mapped out for you, if there's not a way to get to the solution, you freeze and you actually don't begin and you don't know where to start. The consequences of what happens in both these situations is exactly the same. Either nothing happens, you don't build inspiration for the people around you, or you sit there and you wait and hope someone else will solve the issue for you. The result of this is if there is an actual deadline and there is something that you have to produce, it falls on you at the end of it all. You're rushing with all the details, you feel overwhelmed, you feel stressed, you feel unfulfilled. But it's all because at that initial moment, you didn't get started and you didn't figure out a way to solve the issue. A particular story related to this, just to bring it to life for you all, is one that really hits home for me. And this picture on this slide shows Vendor Appreciation Day from 2 years ago here in Boston. Stephanie Westbrook, for those of you who remember her in New York, reached out to me and asked me to run point from the Boston office. I took it on, I agreed, but I didn't really do anything with it. I had hoped she would reach out with a more detailed plan, or someone who had done it in Boston before would give me direction of what to do. So I sat on it. I didn't reach out for help. I didn't talk to anyone in Boston. No one knew what was going on. And it came to be a week before the event, and Stephanie Westbrook reached out and was like, okay, what's your plan? What are you going to do? And I froze. I was like, you mean you're not telling me what to do? I took on all the details. I went out and bought gifts. I invited vendors. I decorated Fenway, and I tried to gather next numbers by sheer force and almost literally dragging people into the room. And the failure there was beyond just me. I didn't just affect myself. I let down the office. I let down our vendors because only one vendor ended up showing up. And it was all because at that initial moment when I didn't know what to do, and I chose to freeze instead of actually be proactive and get some help, it affected more than just myself. The second failure I want to share with you all today is giving up when it gets too difficult. So this one, it's you hit a challenge where you don't actually know how to resolve it, so rather than fighting through that brick wall, you just stop. You find excuses. It's easy to blame someone else. Oh, I couldn't do it because this team wasn't helping me, or I couldn't do it because it wasn't set up properly for me. And you start to put energy in places that are easier, places that are really moving or accelerating, something that seems a little bit more exciting. And you hope that the problem just gets resolved on its own, something that I am a huge victim of. If I don't talk about it, someone else will figure it out and it'll eventually go away. The result of that, though, is you're hiding your failures. And you're going to continue to make the same mistakes as they happen. A story, and I laughed about this in situational workshop the other day, that is very true in my head, was a situational workshop I had with Charlie and Megan. And I came into the situational workshop, I was overwhelmed and I was stressed and I was panicked. And I sat down and Charlie was like, okay, what's your situation? And I just went into it very dramatically, being like, Facebook's not launching, everyone knows why, it's this huge mess. For those of you who don't know, Facebook Global was a contract we had won last summer, and I was given the account and told to make it come to life and go through the steps. So I'd been talking with them, we had a launch date set, and it kept getting pushed back for various reasons I never talked with anyone about. I sat on it, I saw things going wrong, but I didn't really want to discuss where I was struggling with the problem. And what happened was Charlie stopped me and he looked at me, and he's like, stop. And I was like, what? Like Facebook Global, it's not going, this is such a huge deal. And he's like, no one actually cares except you. And I was kind of like, rude, everyone cares. It's Facebook Global. And he's like, it's not about Facebook. He's like, think of how many areas in your life that you're making this mistake, or something gets difficult and it's easier to blame someone else than talk about the challenges or talk about where you're struggling. He's like, think about beyond Facebook. Where else in your life are you making the same exact mistake, where things are getting tough and you're just giving up? And it was such an aha moment for me, being like, you know what, it's so true. It's never my fault. It's the global team's fault. It's Emily's fault. It's Greg's fault. But never did I take the blame and be like, this is where I'm struggling. Can you help me solve this? Versus being like, it's your fault that this isn't working. The third failure that we see a lot is operating with your head down. And similar to the idea of being paralyzed, there are two real ways that this manifests for people. Either you have such a strong conviction that your plan is right. I mean, come hell or high water, you'll make sure this plan, you see it through to the end. Or on the other side of things, you map out your plan and there's some very clear steps. You view it as checkboxes. I have to do X, I have to do Y, I have to do Z, and then I'll have my result. In both of these situations as well, what happens is you start to ignore and you miss warning signs and data points. Where are things going off? With that strong conviction, you're so convinced that what you're doing is right that you don't see that either people are getting annoyed, clients aren't responding, something's not resonating with people. Or with this waterfall approach, you continue to go down, you check off the box, well, I've done A, I've done B, I've done C, why aren't people liking this? Why isn't it resonating? What's wrong? And you're losing sight of the original problem. As you're in your silo and as your head's down, the problem might be changing or it might be evolving, or the situation outside of the problem might be different as well. But because you're in this mode of just accomplish my goal, you're missing all these other signals along the way. The result of this is, at the end of it all, you make no meaningful impact. At the end, when you hit your goal and you expect applause and a pat on the back, it's no longer applicable to the original problem that you were trying to solve. So a very recent story of this and how it affected me was with Super Saturday. Angela was our captain this year, and it was my job to coach her. I felt super overwhelmed with EPP stuff and coaching Angela, and I didn't really know where to begin or how to be most helpful to her. So I viewed it as just something I had to do. Have a check-in with Angela, make sure she has a team, make sure she has a captain. And in my mind, it was check, 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 check. What I missed along the way was the areas where she was struggling and the data points she was missing. As a previous captain, like, I have this experience and I've been through it before. I could have given her so much more insight and helped her catch herself when she was making some questionable calls. Thankfully, in this moment, I had Greg, who was able to call me out as a coach, and we caught ourselves before Super Saturday ended up being a mess. We called a timeout, and it was a really face the truth moment, being like, okay, where are we all off? Not just Angela, but where did I make a missed call as well? Because I just viewed this as something I had to get done versus a real opportunity to make something great. So as I mentioned, those are just 3 examples of failure, but I think they're very relevant. I mean, it's natural to feel overwhelmed in a situation where you're not really sure what to do. And the challenges can be overwhelming, but it's also a chance to see opportunity. As I was even thinking through these 3 examples, I was like, okay, where was I off? And like, what could I have done different to make it a success versus something that I just marked as a failure? So I'm going to walk you through 3 approaches where you can try to be more proactive in those unknown situations. How can you set up your environment so you're better prepared for these unknown situations and ultimately get some success? So the first one, and I start here because I believe it's truly the most valuable area, but it's also the part that gets short thrift and often overlooked. People undervalue the notion of setting up your VX and your V1. And so where you start here, and there's a lot of info involved here, so I'll go slow with you guys. First, it's important to start by articulating the problem you're trying to solve. You're given this unknown, like, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish with this? And once you understand that problem, it's really important to get buy-in at your VX level. How can you inspire people? Your North Star for people who are unfamiliar with the V1 VX language. A common mistake people make here is at that VX level, they believe that it has to be results-oriented. I have to get a 15% increase in the top 10 app that I'm going to use. Whereas you can actually create your VX on a belief or inspiration. Get people excited around the idea of what it could be. Instead of I need 15% more usage, I want top 10 to be the most highly utilized app in the company. I want people to see value in it. I want them to really speak highly of it and talk about it to their friends. Once you get that buy-in, you get people inspired and you get people excited at the VX level, You want to build proof of concept. How can you create your first V1 and get it out in front of people and get that feedback? Ask people what they think. Are you on track? Are they do they buy in with what you're going after? And you use that feedback to grow and to inspire your idea, ideally going down the path to that light at the end of the tunnel, which is your VX. This last point here is actually very important and something I think a lot of people struggle with, myself included. Typically when we map things out, we're like, okay, my V1 is this, my V2 is this, my V3 is this. And you're falling into that checklist mentality. It's like, okay, I know what the next step is. And that's very limiting because as I just mentioned, your problem could solve. And if you're in that checklist mentality, how are you adapting? How are you able to adjust to a changing environment, changing consumer needs, changing internal needs? So people will struggle with this without knowing what's next, but if you have your VX and you're getting critical feedback on your V1 and you're adjusting and you're iterating, the V2 will come. So don't waste all your time and be like, my V1 needs to be perfect and my V2 needs to be perfect. You don't need that to be mapped out. It's a common misconception, and be comfortable knowing that you don't have to have all the answers as you're getting this initial feedback on your product or idea. So the story here, and I'm calling out my TP, is around the Top 10 app. So John and Emily have been working on these mobile apps, and Top 10 was one of them. And when I met with John earlier this week, he was showing me all the tweaks and the bugs he was fixing on the app. And I kind of paused and I just asked him, what's your VX? And he didn't really have an answer, and it came up again in situational workshop where he didn't really know what success was on the app, and he didn't know what he was building towards. And he was missing that overarching goal of what he wanted to do versus just, he sent out an email to MV21, any of you who saw it, where he had a V0, a V1, a V2, a V3, a V4, no VX on the app, and what he had mapped out. So that was just something he's aware of now, but we called out and were able to adjust and fix on the fly. This second area or approach is developing your practice ground. This is where you're going to get started. And ideally you want to start in an area where it's okay to fail and it's very low risk. Here at NextJump we use what we call the CAB framework. So Megan and Charlie touched it on their first Fridays last week. But what you want to do is you want to look at all your options for whatever problem you're trying to solve, whatever situation, whether it's what clients am I going to do, to the exercise we did at the beginning. What awards are out there for us to win? Let's map them all out. Let's see what they are. And you want to call out what are your A's. What are the creams of the crop, the golden stars that you want to win? Mark those, know that that's what you want to go after, and then look at your C's. Where is your practice ground? Where is it okay if you mess up, if you fail, if you make an error, that it's not going to sink the business, it's not going to destroy a relationship? This is where you want to deliberately start testing with your VX goal in mind and with your approach in mind. Where can you start testing and be open to making your mistakes? Another story to tie in here was from a client call that Greg and I had done this week. We were on the EPP side of things, we had this big goal and we want to win City and Apple. And so to get there, so that's our VX, we were like, okay, what are some financial firms, some tech firms that we can start testing with? We've worked on new collateral, a new presentation. We've worked on new talking points, new things to bring to the table and see how it resonates with different companies. So we had a call with this company, Flagstar Financial, a very small bank, I think about 3,000 employees. Typically a call that Greg and I wouldn't normally do, but we did it because we wanted to test out the new deck. And we're on the call with their people, and we get to slide 3 of the presentation, and we both noticed that it's the wrong deck. We had changed words, and it was an old presentation. And it was kind of like an oh shit moment. It was like, what do we do here? Greg stuck with it to his credit, and he went through the deck, and this is an actual slide from the presentation where there was no image. It was an incomplete deck that we were showing. And what it forced him to do was, how do you paint the picture of what you're trying to say when you physically do not have the content on the slide? And while huge failure is something we would never want to do on a city call, what we were able to gain out of it is how do you articulate what you're trying to say? How do you make it very concise and very clear? And it was a great practice ground, and it was a good chance for us to fail and it not make a huge impact. Yes, obviously we want to win the client, we want to impress them, we want to bring them on board, but it's less of a challenge because they were smaller and there was more room for us to fail in this sense with that client. My third tip for you guys today is being comfortable knowing your V1 is wrong. So we've touched on this, get your V1 out there quickly and iterate it and get feedback on it. A common fear with this mindset though is if you admit that you don't know, or if you go out there being like this might not be right, people aren't going to trust you. They won't give you the next big project. They won't value your opinion. But what you actually want to do here, going in knowing your V1 might be off, is collect the data points. Why aren't people buying into this? Where is it off? Where aren't they inspired? And when you collect that critical feedback and share your V1 ideas and beyond, you're gonna likely get one of 3 responses. You'll get a visceral yes, where people are like, yeah, I totally get this, this makes sense, it's awesome. In that case, accelerate, keep moving forward, take the feedback, and make it better. You'll get a visceral no, where people have a strong reaction that you were so off, like you missed the boat on this one. What you want to do is revisit the problem that you're trying to solve. Did you properly articulate it? Does it make sense? Are people bought into it? Do they understand what the problem you're trying to solve is? The most dangerous response, though, is that it's okay. A lot of people read this response as, all right, I'm moving in the right direction, things are okay, I'll continue down this path. But when you don't get a visceral, strong, emotional reaction, you still want to go back and revisit the problem. Okay probably isn't good enough in a lot of these cases because you're going to get to the next version and you're going to get that visceral no. So when you get that ho-hum, it's all right, I really encourage people to go back and revisit how can you more strongly articulate what you're trying to solve or the approach that you're taking to get a stronger reaction from the people that are giving you the feedback. So as I mentioned, these failures, they're all very real, they're all things that we struggle with, and as I was going through this exercise, I realized I still struggle with it too. But when I've started to find myself getting stuck and going down this path, whether it's paralyzed where I don't know what to begin to do, so I just sit on it, or when it's giving up because it gets difficult and I'm pushing the blame and I'm hoping someone else can figure out how to solve it, or if I'm operating with my head down, viewing things as a checklist, starting to be able to catch yourself when you're making those habits and put some of your approaches into practice. So the setting up the VX and the V1. These practices have been super helpful from the EPP side of things. Like I mentioned, putting the strategy of how are we going to dominate tech and finance. That was so broad. So we were able to, and it was theoretical, it was very high level. So we were able to narrow it down. How do you win Citi and Apple? The problem we were looking to solve became much more directed, and we were able to figure out, okay, what's the V1? How can we get feedback on that? And got the buy-in from more people and more teams. A story to share, it's actually very real life, and something that happened just yesterday was, I was talking with my roommate earlier this week about this presentation, and I walked her through my thinking, and she brushed it off me like, you know what, this really isn't applicable to anyone outside of NextJump. Like, no one else can really find value in something like this. And I was like, oh, that's not very nice, but okay, whatever. Come last night, I get home, and she was freaking out. She was like very stressed. She was pacing around the house. And I was like, what's wrong? Like, you were fine this morning. Her company went through a reorg. People were laid off, people were fired, people were moved off. And they assigned her this project of figuring out how the company can set up an IPO. Like, what's the approach to go after it? She was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, why would they give this project to me? Who do they think I am? I can't do this. Pacing the room, it was very stressful. So I let her talk it out, and I was like, oh, can I walk you through my presentation for tomorrow? And she was like, how rude. Like, I am very stressed out right now, and you want to make it about you. So I walked her through the presentation and the approach and the steps that I was taking. And she paused, and she was like, well, what if no one buys into my plan? Like, what if I have this great V1 and this great idea, and I'm actively going after it, but no one else buys into it? And I encouraged her. I was like, go back and figure out, okay, what is the problem you're trying to solve? If your problem is just, we want an IPO by January 2016, maybe people don't find that believable, or maybe they see all the other holes. Like, can you make it more directed, or can you make it at a higher belief level of, you know what, I want to make my company, which I won't say because I don't know if I'm allowed to, the best place to work, or very profitable, or take it to the next level and bring it to a national forefront. And she paused and she thought about it, and she was like, you're right, there's a lot of little things we can do along the way. She's like, I'm starting to see what my V1 can be. We need to get our financials in order. We need to do X, Y, and Z. And in that quick brainstorming session, she started to see the challenges she was making, being like, I can't do it, it's too difficult, to, all right, I can see how I can go about this if I just redefine what I'm trying to say and the questions that I'm asking. So I encourage you that while it might seem theoretical, or it might seem, you know, this isn't all that applicable, try it. When you find yourself getting stuck in a situation, or when you find an area where you don't know how to begin, call a time out and be like, okay, where am I off? And at minimum, go back and revisit the question of, like, what was I trying to solve to begin with? And then putting these practices in place. So I thank you all for your time. I hope you found this helpful, and if there are questions, I think we have some time for a quick Q&A.